One of the great things about having been a journalist, a foreign correspondent in South Africa in the aftermath of watching Nelson Mandela walk to freedom is that Mr. Mandela came up with an ingenious idea, the formation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, to talk about race, to talk about the villains and the victors, and people went into a room and they tried to understand the Afrikaner and the black kid, black parent living in Soweto. Truth and reconciliation. Race is in the DNA of this country. Any president who doesn't understand that often fails in the job. I want to introduce you to an author who has engaged in a form of truth and reconciliation. Jeff Hobbs is the Dayton Literary Peace Prize 2015 runner-up in nonfiction for The Short and Tragic Life of Robert Peace, the account of the life of his roommate at Yale, Robert Deshawn Peace, a talented young African-American man who left Newark, New Jersey on a full scholarship to Yale University, but was tragically murdered in a basement marijuana lab after he graduated. Jeff shared Robert's story twice on Friday during the DLPP Day on Justice and Peace. The author of The Tourist, a national best-selling novel, Hobbs lives with his wife and 2 children in Los Angeles, where he is working on his second book of nonfiction. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Hobbs.
Thank you so much, Mr. Haygood, and thank you all for having me back. Someone asked me tonight if I like this kind of thing, and I responded, I do not like this kind of thing, but I really like this particular thing. Very grateful. I get to introduce Jessica, who I had the privilege of seeing Jessica and Kennedy speak about their book, Find Me Unafraid, about a year ago. And so my goal is just to get out of your way very fast. It's a shame that, these 2 human beings are everything. It's a shame Kennedy is not here, but at the same time, I think it might be kind of nice to shine a light directly on Jessica for her courage, her service, her heart. That might make her very uncomfortable, but it's okay to be uncomfortable. A poetry professor once explained romance to me as bringing 2 people together when every force in the universe is trying to keep them apart. And he's a poetry professor, so he's allowed to say things like that with a straight face. We're in the midst here of master fiction craftsmen who are able to do that. Mr. Anthony Doerr maybe did that better, more beautifully than anybody ever. When you encounter romance in real life, either a friend or by reading an amazing book, and just read this book. It's astonishing, and it inspires us not just to love more, but to do more. At the same time, I feel like that poetry professor was maybe exactly wrong. Sometimes romance is bringing 2 people together when everything in the universe is trying to bring them together. That said, Jessica, in the words of my legally blind, batty Brooklynite father-in-law, when he learned that I had proposed to his daughter a couple weeks after meeting her, Jessica, welcome to the family.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I'm so happy to be standing here. It's a tremendous honor. Thank you, Sharon, and to everyone who's associated with the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. I last night sent a photo to my mom of the panel and said, who would have thought that our book would be among the books that are being honored here tonight? So it's really amazing. I want to tell you briefly the story of two young people from different corners of the world, in the hopes that our story stands for a world where stories like ours are possible. Kennedy, who's not here tonight, was born into violence. He was born in a tiny village in the interior of Kenya as a breech baby to a 15-year-old mother, with no skilled birth attendants anywhere to be seen. Despite all of the odds, both Kennedy and his mother survived. And that night, in the middle of a drought, it started to rain. Odede means after the drought. But Kennedy was given another name, a name that is an emblem of peace in our world, and that name is Kennedy. And this name became a prophecy because as his life continued in Africa's largest slum, every day was a harrowing survival story. He saw violence, he saw hopelessness, he saw people giving up around him, and yet he chose peace. And this was a difficult decision. It was something that as he saw his friends, he saw one of his closest friends beaten to death by a mob when he was 11 years old for simply stealing a handbag. Kennedy himself was a homeless kid living on the streets, using violence and drugs and glue, sniffing paraffin to survive. But still, he chose peace. Books became his manual. He looked at stories like Martin Luther King, like Nelson Mandela, like Marcus Garvey, and he had conversations with these mentors, conversations that for him were real, that for him saved his life. Kennedy recently turned 30, and on the day of his 30th birthday, at the very edge of a new decade of life, he realized that only 2 of his childhood friends would ever have the same experience. Everyone else had died long ago. My life couldn't have been more different. I was born into a world where peace was the expectation, where living was what I expected. For Kennedy, it wasn't the same. In Denver, Colorado, I had everything I could ever hope for: a good education. My biggest decisions were what shoes I might wear to school that day. But I wanted to see what the world looked like. And when I was 21 at Wesleyan University, I decided I wanted to study abroad. And so I put my finger on a map and it landed on Kenya. And I called my mom and I told her this really exciting idea about how I was going to study abroad in Kenya, and she flipped out. And so then Kenya became really exciting. And from Denver, I wrote an email to Kennedy and I said, I had heard by chance about his work, and I said, hi, I'd like to come live with you. Because Kennedy, despite all of the influences around him that would have led him to anger, he took 20 cents, He had a job working in a factory where every day he earned $1 for 10 hours. But instead of being angry, instead of being furious at the wasted opportunity, at the fact that this was going to be his entire life, he started organizing young people to change this reality. And the news of this reached me, a young girl in Denver, Colorado. So when I wrote him and said I wanted to live with him, he wrote back and said, "You have no idea what you're talking about." But I was determined. And I knew that the only way I could actually understand this community was to become a part of it. And so I wrote back and I said, "If you can live there, why can't I?" And when I first moved into Kibera, that first morning, there was a line of people outside of Kennedy's door waiting to see if I survived the night. I survived, and then Kennedy and I fell in love. But the whole time, living in Kibera, the thing that stayed with me was the fact that I had a choice that nobody else around me had. I could always leave. And I started to realize about the randomness of the world, the injustice, that I did nothing to be born in Denver, Colorado, and Kennedy did nothing to be born in Kibera. And yet, this is what happened. And that stayed with me. Despite everything that should have kept us apart, black and white, rich and poor, we decided to love each other anyway. Kennedy asked me to marry him, but he didn't tell me that that was actually what was happening. I ended up in his rural village, and we were building a house together, and there was his mother and his family, and everyone was standing in a circle and speaking a language I didn't speak, and a woman took my hand and placed it in Kennedy's and said, "This is your house now." And I looked at Kennedy and I said, "Is this a wedding?" A wedding looks the same in any language. And I was furious on that day, and he said, "You wouldn't have understood." And I told him, "You didn't give me a chance." But part of what we've learned and part of what we've decided together is that part of loving someone from a world that is so different, where the basic expectations are completely foreign, is sometimes you don't understand, but you give each other the chance and you love each other anyway. Our work together has grown from the 20 cents and the soccer ball. Today, we are transforming urban communities across Kenya with a movement that builds schools for girls, healthcare, clean water, economic empowerment, and programs that are every day making a choice, despite difficulties, to declare peace. This year, we'll serve over 120,000 people in the slums across Kenya, and we're just getting started. Thank you. We've now been together 10 years, and our proudest accomplishment is that together we've raised Kennedy's youngest brother as our own since he was 3 years old. And Hillary told me recently that he'd been thinking a lot about the world, and he said, "Mom, I think I'm part Jewish, part Christian, and part scientist." And Kennedy and I looked at each other, and I think we both thought, and our book is about, a world where that is possible, where we can be the best pieces of each other, where we can be born in worlds that are violent and worlds that are peaceful, and come together and work towards a world that is just, that opportunity is available to everyone. Because what we have seen is that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And our book is a book about perspective. It's a book about the limits and the latitude of what two people can possibly share. And the fact that we can't share everything, and yet there is bravery in loving each other anyway. And deciding that there are things we can never understand, and yet making a choice to claim another as your own. And I believe, and I hope our story shows, that perhaps the first step towards peace, and the only step, is a choice towards love. Thank you very much.